My name is Emily, 34 years old, and my life was turned upside down when my husband, Daniel, tragically passed away in a work accident. We were a happy family, raising our 7-year-old son, Noah. But that all changed the moment Daniel was taken from us. The accident occurred at his construction site, and after that, I didn't just lose my partner, my best friend, but I also had to take on the burden of raising Noah alone. Losing Daniel was a shock to my entire world. But even in the midst of this pain, I found some solace in the support of Daniel's family. Daniel worked in construction, and he was passionate about his job. When he died, I didn't just lose a husband, but also my partner in everything. In raising Noah, in making decisions, in planning for the future. But despite the immense grief, I knew I couldn't fall apart, not when Noah needed me more than ever. For months after the accident, my days were filled with paperwork, sleepless nights, and moments of overwhelming sorrow. It was a blur, and I often found myself just going through the motions. But even in my darkest moments, Daniel's family, especially his parents, James and Mary, stepped in to help. They took care of Noah when I needed to work, picked him up from school, and looked after him whenever I had late meetings. James and Mary were always there for me. They offered help without hesitation and expected nothing in return, just love and support. They loved both me and Noah as though we were their own, and for that, I was forever grateful. In contrast, things were far from supportive on my side of the family. My parents, especially my mother, had always favored my younger sister, Claire. This favoritism had been present throughout my entire life, and it didn't change even after Daniel's passing. Instead of receiving understanding and compassion, I found myself overshadowed by Claire's achievements and the attention my parents lavished on her. Since Daniel's death, I had hoped that my family would be there for me, especially during such a difficult time. But instead, they continued to give all their attention to Claire. My mother constantly praised Claire for her accomplishments, her good fortune, and everything she did right. Meanwhile, I was the one left to struggle, to be the one who was never quite enough. When Daniel passed, I thought my family would step up, offering their emotional support. Instead, they turned their backs in a way I never expected. My mother continued to dote on Claire, and even during my grief, she would talk about her success in the workplace and in life. It was as though my struggles didn't matter, as though I wasn't worth their time or concern. When the insurance money from Daniel's life insurance policy came through, I received 300,000 euros from the payout. It was a substantial amount, enough to secure Noah's future and give us some financial stability. But instead of seeing it as a source of security for me and Noah, my parents saw it as a tool to benefit them. They weren't interested in helping me build a future. They wanted to take advantage of what we had. One evening, during a dinner at my parents' house, my father bluntly asked about the life insurance payout. The question was jarring, and I was completely caught off guard. When I told him the amount, he immediately started asking how I planned to use the money, and it became clear they were expecting me to give them a share. The way he pressed me about it, the way he subtly implied I should share the wealth, was both uncomfortable and disheartening. My parents were never shy about asking for financial help, and their expectations were high. They made it seem as if it was my duty to share with them, to help the family, even though I had my own son to care for. I reluctantly agreed to send money to them each month, even though every part of me resented the pressure. Since that moment, things between us only grew more strained. I felt trapped in a cycle of obligation, where my parents would ask for more, but I was always left feeling alone when I needed help. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was being used, not just by my parents, but also by Claire. Every month, I would send money to my parents, but whenever I needed something, help with Noah, a break from the responsibilities I carried, there was always an excuse. I'm too busy. I'm not feeling well. I have errands to run. Meanwhile, Daniel's family continued to offer their help without expecting anything in return. I was exhausted by the emotional weight of it all. The promises and the lack of follow-through, the expectation that I would always be there for them, while I was left struggling to keep my own head above water. It felt like I was doing everything I could for my son, for my family, but never getting the same in return. Then an invitation came that would set everything in motion, an invitation to a New Year's Eve party at my parents' house. At first, I was hesitant. After everything, I didn't know if I even wanted to go. But I thought maybe it would help keep the peace, help me maintain some semblance of family connection. So I decided to attend, despite the gnawing feeling in my stomach. The New Year's Eve party invitation from my parents arrived like any other typical family gathering invite, polite, but with an underlying sense of obligation. I knew deep down it wasn't just a casual invite, and when I thought about it, I started to feel a tight knot in my stomach. What was supposed to be a night of celebrating a new year quickly started to feel more like another battleground where my presence would be scrutinized, where my choices, my actions, and my life would be quietly judged. I wasn't sure what to expect. After all, the last few months had been full of tension. The conversation I'd had with my parents about the insurance money still weighed heavily on my mind. It felt like I had crossed a line with them, doing what they asked of me, giving them part of what was supposed to be Noah's future. Every time I handed them that money, it felt like a piece of my dignity was lost. The worst part? I wasn't sure if they truly appreciated it, or if they just expected more. On the night of the party, I left Noah with James and Mary, my in-laws, who were more than happy to keep him entertained. They adored him, and Noah was always at his best when he was surrounded by their warmth and care. The drive to my parents' house felt like the longest I had taken in months, and as I pulled up to their driveway, the familiar unease began to creep up on me again. When I stepped inside, I immediately noticed something odd. The house was filled with laughter, the hum of conversations, and a myriad of voices. But when I scanned the room, I was stunned. My sister Claire and her 3 children were already there, glued to their phones as usual, not paying any attention to the adults. The house seemed to have transformed from what I expected to be a quiet adult gathering into something completely different. There were kids everywhere, running around, playing with toys, laughing too loudly, and scattering wrapping paper across the floor. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My parents had told me this was an adults-only party, a chance to get away from the kids, but now here were Claire's children, running freely through the house. The contrast was glaring. I stood in the doorway, holding my gift bag limply, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My son, Noah, who had been excluded, was nowhere to be found. I tried to brush the bitterness away, but it was impossible to ignore. Aunt Marie, always the sweet and bubbly one, was the first to notice me. She rushed over, pulling me into a hug, her excitement palpable. "Dakota, sweetheart, where's little Noah? Is he sick?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Her words stung, but I managed to smile, trying to keep my composure. My cousin Peter, always the joker, piped in next. "Yeah, where's our favorite little scientist? Jake's been asking about him. He's got that new chemistry set he's dying to show Noah," he said with a chuckle. I felt my chest tighten. Why were they all asking about Noah like he was the one missing out? I didn't have the strength to explain why Noah wasn't here. I didn't want to explain, because I was still trying to figure out how my own family could have done this to us. The reality was harsh. While my sister's kids ran wild, my son, who was nothing but polite and curious, was excluded. It was painful, and I could feel my anger rising. I made my way to the kitchen, where my mother was busy arranging cookies on a platter. She turned as I approached, and the moment our eyes met, I knew. She had orchestrated all of this. Her eyes darted around nervously before she offered me a tight smile. "Oh, you made it, Emily. I'm so glad you're here," she said, but there was a false cheer in her voice that I knew all too well. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Mom, You told me this was an adults-only party, I began, my voice low but steady. So why are Claire's kids here? Why are all the cousins' children here, but Noah isn't welcome? My mother's expression immediately changed. She tensed, the defensive posture I'd grown so familiar with returning. She placed the platter of cookies down, wiped her hands on her apron, and met my gaze, though she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Well, that's different, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room, where Claire's children were still making noise. They know how to behave at a gathering like this. They're well-mannered. My mother didn't even flinch as she spoke those words. Her eyes glazed over as if she were trying to convince herself, as much as she was trying to convince me. I stared at her in disbelief. Well-mannered? I repeated. Mom, Noah is one of the most polite children I know. He asks questions because he's curious, he's learning. But you're calling that behavior unacceptable? She shrugged, a dismissive motion that felt like a slap. No, Emily, she said, her voice dropping into that condescending tone I knew all too well. Your son is just too much. He asks too many questions. The others, they know their place. They understand how to behave properly. Before I could respond, a loud crash came from the other room. Rachel's youngest, Kevin, had grabbed a handful of deviled eggs and thrown them at his sister, who was wearing a brand new dress. The room fell silent for a moment, and I caught my mother's eye. She didn't seem to care about the chaos or the mess. Instead, she simply shook her head, muttering, "Oh, kids!" I couldn't hold back anymore. The anger I had buried deep inside for so long began to spill over. You know what, Mom? I said, raising my voice just a little. I can clearly see the superior manners on display here. It's astonishing. She didn't have a chance to respond before I turned on my heel and walked back into the living room, the room full of relatives who were now watching me with a mix of confusion and curiosity. It was time for the truth to come out, even if it made everyone uncomfortable. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone's eyes were on me as I stood there, heart pounding, feeling both empowered and emotionally drained. I had been carrying the weight of my family's favoritism for so long, quietly letting it fester, but now it was all spilling out. The hypocrisy, the manipulation, the lack of fairness, I couldn't take it anymore. I had finally reached my breaking point. My mother was silent for a moment, a look of mild shock on her face. She clearly wasn't used to being confronted like this. She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't about to let her justify her actions with another dismissive excuse. The room was now completely still, the sounds of children playing in the other room barely audible over the deafening silence. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice shaking slightly but firm. You've been treating Noah like he doesn't matter. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything's okay anymore. My mother's face softened, but I could see the defensive walls going up behind her eyes. Emily, I didn't mean for it to be like this, she said, her tone more placating than apologetic. I just want what's best for the family, for you, but I don't understand why you're making this such a big deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her words only confirmed everything I had been feeling for so long. My needs, my son's well-being, had never really mattered to her. The truth was, I had never been able to live up to her expectations. I had always tried to please her, to fit into the mold she wanted for me. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And now, when I needed her most, all I got was her indifference, her reluctance to even understand the depth of my hurt. I turned away from her, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists at my sides. The thought of staying any longer in that house, surrounded by people who couldn't see the damage they'd caused, was unbearable. I had already spent too many years trying to earn their approval, trying to prove that I was good enough, that I deserved to be loved and respected. But it was clear now that this would never change. I'm done, I said quietly, but with finality. The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest. I've given enough, and I'm done trying to make things right with people who don't care about me or Noah. The room seemed to exhale collectively. My mother stood frozen, her face pale and stricken with a mix of surprise and disbelief. She wasn't expecting me to leave, to walk away like this. But I knew that I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when my son was being treated like an outsider by the very people who should be supporting us. Without waiting for her to respond, I turned to face the room one last time. The relatives who had been watching the exchange remained silent, unsure of what to do or say. I looked at them, seeing their confusion, but it no longer mattered to me. I was done seeking validation from these people who had never truly understood me. "I'm not sending any more money," I continued, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm not going to let you manipulate me any longer, and I won't tolerate watching you treat my son like he doesn't belong here. From now on, I will be cutting ties with all of you. I've done enough." The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of the decision settling in. There was no going back now. This was the moment when I finally took control of my life, when I stopped letting my family's toxic behavior dictate how I felt about myself and my son. My mother's face twisted with something between frustration and regret. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Don't bother. I've heard enough," I said, turning toward the door. "This isn't a family, not anymore." As I walked out of the house, I could hear the murmurs of my relatives behind me, but I didn't turn back. I had made up my mind. I was done with the manipulations, the guilt trips, and the empty promises. The only family that mattered now was the one I had built with Daniel. I was exhausted. Exhausted by years of giving, only to be taken for granted. Exhausted by the constant need to prove my worth to people who would never see me for who I truly was. But as I stepped out into the cold night, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't known in years. I had made the right decision. I left my parents' house that night with my heart pounding and my head spinning. The drive back to James and Mary's house was a blur. It was cold, and the streets were empty, but I felt a strange sense of liberation. I hadn't realized how suffocating the weight of my family's expectations had been until I walked out that door. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken control of my own life, and it felt good. When I pulled into James and Mary's driveway, I saw Noah's face light up through the window. He was sitting with James, eating cookies they had baked together. The sight of him smiling so freely, so happy, made everything worth it. This was the life I wanted for him, one where he was loved and accepted, not judged or excluded. Noah ran to the door as soon as he saw my car. "Mom!" he called, his voice full of excitement, and I felt a rush of love for him. Despite everything that had happened, seeing him so happy and safe made my heart swell. As I stepped inside, James greeted me with a warm hug. "How was it?" he asked gently. He could tell something was off, but he knew better than to press. I didn't have to say much. He had seen the exhaustion on my face, the anger in my eyes. "I'm done," I said simply. "I won't do it anymore, James. I won't keep putting up with their manipulations. It's over." James nodded, his face full of understanding. "You did the right thing, Emily. You deserve so much better than that." That night, I took a deep breath and realized how much I had been holding in. For so long, I had let my family define my worth, let them dictate how I should live my life, even after Daniel's passing. But now, I was free. I could make my own choices, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my own family, take that freedom away from me. Over the next few weeks, I focused on Noah, on creating a peaceful life for the two of us. I spent more time with James and Mary, who had never made me feel anything but welcome. They were the family I had always wished for, and they never expected anything in return. They loved us unconditionally, without strings attached. One of the things I had always loved about James and Mary was how simple their lives were. They weren't concerned with impressing others or keeping up with appearances. They focused on what really mattered: love, family, and genuine connection. They didn't need money, status, or any form of validation. They were content with their lives, and that sense of peace was contagious. I spent my evenings with them, helping Mary cook dinner or sitting with James in the living room, watching movies while Noah played with his toys. It was a life that, though small, felt incredibly rich. Noah thrived here, in the warmth of their home, in an environment where questions were encouraged, where he was free to be himself without anyone telling him he was too much. As the months passed, I began to feel the shift within myself. The pain of losing Daniel was still there, and I knew it always would be. But I no longer carried the burden of trying to meet my family's expectations. I had found a new sense of purpose. I was determined to build a life for Noah that wasn't tainted by the toxic dynamics of my birth family. James and Mary's home became a sanctuary for us. It was a place of love, a place where Noah could ask questions, learn, and grow without fear of being judged. I realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who truly cared about you, who supported you, and who made you feel safe and valued. I stopped looking back. I no longer waited for apologies or explanations from my parents. Their manipulation and betrayal had taught me a hard lesson. That family, in its truest form, was about respect, support, and unconditional love, and my birth family had failed to provide that. I stopped answering their calls, stopped responding to their messages. The guilt that had plagued me for so long started to fade, and in its place, I found peace. The decision to cut ties with my parents wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't keep allowing them to drain me emotionally, to make me feel like I wasn't good enough. In the meantime, I continued to build a life with James and Mary. I found a sense of stability in their company, and Noah was thriving in ways I never imagined. He was surrounded by people who loved him, people who appreciated his curiosity and his inquisitive nature. There were no restrictions on his personality here. He could grow and explore freely without the shadow of criticism looming over him. I had always dreamed of raising Noah in a world where he could ask questions and challenge ideas, and now, with James and Mary's support, I was able to do just that. Noah was becoming the kind of person I had always hoped he would be: kind, compassionate, and confident. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't need my birth family's approval anymore. I didn't need their love or their validation. I had found a new family, one that accepted me and Noah for who we were, and that was enough. As the new year approached, I made a decision. It was time to let go of the past, time to stop living in the shadow of people who had never truly cared for me. I had spent so many years trying to earn their approval, trying to live up to their impossible standards. But now, I was going to focus on the future, on building a life for myself and Noah, one where we could thrive without the weight of toxic relationships holding us back. This was my fresh start, and I was going to make the most of it. Weeks went by, and life began to settle into a routine I could finally breathe in. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for years. Noah continued to thrive, and I focused on my work and my life with James and Mary. In many ways, it felt like we were becoming a family of our own, one built on love, trust, and mutual respect. There was no drama, no stress, no expectation to meet impossible standards. I had finally let go of the toxic influence of my birth family, and I felt lighter with each passing day. But as with all things, the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. I should have known that the fallout from the confrontation at my parents' house wasn't going to just disappear. After weeks of silence, I started receiving messages from family members. It was like they had all agreed to remain quiet until they could figure out how to salvage the damage they had done. At first, it was just small, inconspicuous messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey, Emily, are you doing okay?" they would ask, or, "We've been thinking about you and Noah, just wanted to check in." I ignored them at first, knowing they weren't truly concerned, but merely trying to restore their own sense of guilt. After all, it wasn't like any of them had reached out during the most difficult time of my life. Then came the text from Rachel. I had blocked her number after the New Year's Eve debacle, but somehow she managed to find another way to reach me. "We need to talk," the message said, simple and to the point. "Mom and Dad are very sorry. We want to make things right. Please, just hear us out." I stared at the message for a while, considering what to do. On the one hand, part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her everything I had been holding in for years. I wanted to remind her that it wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about how they had treated me, about how they had used me. But on the other hand, I knew that engaging in any conversation with her, with my parents, would only drag me back into the emotional turmoil I had worked so hard to escape. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, was this a genuine apology, or just another manipulation to get what they wanted? Was it truly possible that they had changed, or were they simply trying to save face after being exposed? I decided to take the call. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to hear them out for my own closure, if nothing else. Rachel sounded different when she picked up. Gone was the self-righteous tone she had used before. This time she sounded vulnerable, almost remorseful. "Emily, I can't believe how everything went down. Mom and Dad, they're devastated. They really are. They want to make things right with you, with Noah," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. For a moment, I felt a twinge of something, maybe hope, maybe skepticism. But then, the anger crept in, and I remembered everything. The years of silence, the way they had treated me, the way they had treated Noah. I couldn't just forget it all because they suddenly felt guilty. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Rachel," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've had your chances. You all have. You made your choices, and I'm done trying to fit into your version of what family should be. I'm not going to pretend that I don't remember everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Rachel's breath catch, like she wasn't quite ready for me to be so blunt. "I understand," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I know we've messed up, and I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for the way Mom and Dad treated you." I let her words sit for a moment, weighing them in my mind. Could she really be sorry? Or was this just another attempt to get me to fall back into their toxic web? I didn't know, but what I did know was that I was no longer in a place where I was willing to just accept words without actions behind them. "You've had your chance, Rachel," I said, with more resolve than I felt. "I can't just forget how everything happened, and honestly, I don't want to go back to that. I have a life now, one that's built on respect and love, not manipulation and favoritism. Noah and I are happy, and we don't need anyone who doesn't truly see us for who we are." There was a brief silence before Rachel spoke again, this time with a hint of sadness in her voice. "I understand, Emily. I really do. But I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get this bad. I hope one day you can forgive us." I ended the conversation there, knowing I couldn't go any further. I didn't know if forgiveness was even possible at this point, but I did know that I had forgiven myself for the years I had spent trying to earn their love. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I continued to distance myself from my birth family. My decision was firm, and though I occasionally received more messages from them, I remained resolute. I knew that the apology, if it ever came, had to be backed by actions, not just words. Meanwhile, life with James and Mary grew even stronger. We spent our days laughing, enjoying simple moments, and making memories that Noah would cherish for years to come. We celebrated holidays and birthdays without the drama, without the baggage of past disappointments. And to my surprise, I began to realize that the family I had once longed for wasn't made of blood. It was made of the people who truly cared for me and Noah. The days following my final confrontation with my birth family passed in a blur. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years, but the relief was bittersweet. I wasn't sure whether it was the sense of closure or the deep pain of having walked away from the only family I had known. But as I lay in bed at night, Noah's soft breathing filling the space beside me, I knew without a doubt that I had made the right choice. It wasn't that I didn't miss my parents sometimes. I did. There were moments when the absence of their presence felt like a gaping hole, like when Noah asked why he couldn't see his grandparents, or when I found myself longing for the simpler days when we would have Sunday dinners together. But those moments of longing were fleeting, because the truth was, their love had never been unconditional. It had always come with strings attached, with expectations and conditions that I could no longer bear. Over time, I grew more comfortable in my new life. James and Mary continued to be my rock, offering unwavering support and affection, and Noah thrived in the warm, supportive environment they created for him. He started asking questions about the world around him, not because he was trying to challenge the rules, but because he wanted to understand. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for his curiosity. There was no shame in him wanting to know, wanting to learn, to be himself. And with James and Mary's love and encouragement, he grew more confident each day. Months passed, and the holidays rolled around again. It was a time when I usually would have been forced to make the difficult decision of whether to spend time with my family or endure another tense, uncomfortable gathering. But this year, I didn't have to make that choice. I had already made it long ago. The holidays were now about us. Noah, James, Mary, and me. We didn't need the drama, the manipulation, or the judgment of my parents. We had built our own traditions, one filled with joy, laughter, and love. One evening, as we all sat together in the living room, Noah with his new book in hand, James and Mary preparing the dinner, and me reflecting on how far I had come, I realized that my life had changed in ways I hadn't even anticipated. The decision to leave my toxic family had freed me in a way I hadn't thought possible. For so long, I had thought family meant tolerating their actions, making excuses and pretending everything was fine. But now, I knew the truth. Family wasn't about putting up with dysfunction. It was about mutual respect, love, and understanding. The phone rang one chilly December afternoon, interrupting my thoughts. I saw the caller ID. It was my mother. I hesitated. It had been months since I'd last heard from her, and despite my resolve, part of me felt a twinge of anxiety. I had already made it clear that I wasn't interested in maintaining a relationship with her, with any of them. Still, I took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Emily." My mother's voice came through, tentative and uncertain. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to talk. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how wrong I was." I didn't respond immediately. Her words hung in the air, thick with regret. I wasn't sure how to feel. On the one hand, it was the apology I had waited for, or at least the version of it I'd hoped for. On the other, I wasn't sure I could simply forgive and forget, not after everything that had happened. "Mom," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm glad you're thinking about what happened, but I need you to understand something. It's not just about saying sorry, it's about what happened before. The years of favoritism, the manipulation, the way you treated Noah and me." I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. "I've moved on, Mom. I found my peace. I'm not going back to that place, not for anyone. and I don't think I can ever trust you again, the way I used to." Her voice cracked. "I know, and I understand," she said, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry. I can't change what's happened, but I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't know how to respond to that. A part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the years of hurt. But another part of me knew that forgiveness wasn't something I could just give easily. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about Noah and the life I was building for him. And as I looked over at him, nestled safely in his new family, with his laughter filling the room, I realized I didn't need to look back anymore. "I've already forgiven myself, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "And that's all I need. I hope you can understand that." We both sat in silence for a while. I could hear her sniffling on the other end of the line, but I had no more words to offer. I wasn't going to fall for the same traps anymore, not for her, not for anyone. I had learned to love myself and Noah enough to walk away from what was unhealthy, no matter the consequences. "I wish you well, Mom," I said finally, the words feeling like the final thread being cut. "Goodbye." The line went silent and I hung up. I sat there for a moment, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I had finally put it to rest. The past, the pain, the guilt, it was over. As the days passed, I became more and more certain that I had made the right decision. No more manipulation, no more toxic relationships, just me, Noah, and the family we had chosen for ourselves. There was nothing I needed from anyone else. We had each other, and that was enough. And as the year came to an end, I looked forward to a new chapter, a chapter where I didn't have to apologize for who I was, where I didn't have to fight for love or acceptance. I had built something beautiful, something real, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Noah, with his endless questions and bright eyes, was growing into the person I had always hoped he would become, a person full of kindness, curiosity, and love. Together we were moving forward into a future that was ours to create, free from the shadows of the past. And for the first time, I could say it without hesitation. I was truly happy. Story 2. You should see your face when you attempt to narrate a story, honey. As Matthew's words echoed throughout our living room, our assembled guests began to snicker. She rambles on and on without ever getting to the point. It's similar to witnessing someone attempt blindfolded parallel parking. My cheeks burned from the familiar laughing that filled the room. I gripped my wine glass tighter and made myself smile, a smile I had practiced for the 5 years we had been married. Inside, something broke. At 32, I'm Tasha Reynolds, and I'm sick of being the target of my husband's jokes. I oversee a team of 15 employees and manage multi-million-dollar campaigns as a marketing executive for one of Houston's leading companies. I'm just Matthew's favorite target at home, though, the center of his never-ending jokes on everything from my appearance to my eating. Tonight was meant to be a simple dinner with friends, but like every previous social occasion, it had evolved into the Matthew Show. He was in rare form, entertaining our guests with story after story, each one designed to make me look foolish. When I attempted to announce that I had recently been promoted at work, he interrupted by saying that I most likely dozed off during the meeting where they made the announcement. I could sleep through an earthquake after all. More steps, more laughs. But really, he kept putting his arm around my shoulders in the same possessive manner. At work, you should watch her attempt to deliver presentations. Do you recall the day you contacted me in tears because you couldn't remember the name of the client? That never occurred. But Matthew had a knack of making up things that sounded just convincing enough, adding nuggets of reality to his tales. Even though I sometimes questioned my own memories. And always, when I tried to defend myself, he'd just smile that condescending smile and say, "Relax. It's only a joke." I watched him holding court in our living room, so confident, so sure of his power over me in this audience, but he didn't know that I'd finally had enough. My throat was burning with his deepest secret, the one he had pleaded with me to keep silent about, while I sat there and observed his performance. A perilous lucidity descended over me. Perhaps it was time for a truly humorous story to be told to everyone. At first glance, Matthew's quips were harmless enough. I was representing my marketing agency at the corporate function where we first met. His jokes about losing my drink seemed playful rather than cruel, and he was kind and successful. "You're adorable when you're flustered," he commented, helping me clean up. I assumed he was being flirting. At first, the changes were so subtle. Comments about how I couldn't dress myself without his assistance, and occasional jokes about my poor sense of direction in front of his friends. As if to make up for the hurt of his remarks, he would always follow up with lavish presents and beautiful gestures. I had always had faith in my abilities. Alex, my boss, used to commend my presenting ability and quick wit. But somewhere along the line, Matthew's constant jokes started seeping into my consciousness. I began second-guessing myself in meetings. I could hear his mocking voice in my imagination. The day of our wedding ought to have served as a warning. He had the entire audience laughing during his speech as he related anecdotes about my awkwardness and forgetfulness. My father looked uneasy, but everyone else appeared to think it amusing. I told myself it was just Matthew's funny way of expressing his affection. The problems with intimacy began around 2 years ago. Matthew initially blamed my neediness, then job stress. Something changed in him when we ultimately saw a doctor and discovered out about his impotence. The jokes became more frequent and more serious. To make himself more important, he appeared to have to discredit me. "Don't tell anyone." When the diagnosis came, he had begged. "This remains private between us." I had agreed because I wanted to protect him, even as his public humiliation of me grew worse. I didn't tell anyone about him. Isn't that what a respectable wife does? I heard him making up stories about me being cold and difficult to please while he was on the phone with his friend Brad last week. As I heard him convert our personal disputes into yet another occasion to make fun of me, my rage began to boil. For the last 5 years of my life, I have shrunk in order to avoid becoming the target of his next joke. For 5 years, I've been pretending to laugh while dying within. He exposed all of my flaws, both imagined and genuine, to the world while keeping his secrets for 5 years. I look around at the people in our living room who have laughed at his jokes for years. If they were aware of the truth, I wonder if they would still find him so fascinating. The best part comes next. As he spoke, Matthew's voice raised sharply. In reality, Tasha attempted to arrange a romantic lunch last week. All around you, it ought to have burnt to a clear smoke. Even when she boils water, she has a crisis. My skin felt like needles from the laughing. In actuality, I had spent hours preparing that meal in an effort to provide a forum for us to discuss our worries. Only because I was preoccupied with a call from Matthew informing me that he would be late again did the smoke occur. Brad's wife, Jennifer, leaned forward with a wine glass in her hand. She tries, at least. "Matt, how recently did you cook anything?" I had a brief moment of gratitude, but Matthew quickly put it out of my mouth. "Yes, I make sure she is happy in a number of ways." He smiled and shot me a knowing look. "Sure, honey?" The room was filled with suggestive laughter. As I watched Matthew relish in their response, my cheeks began to flame. He knew exactly what he was doing, indicating a falsehood to divert attention away from his own failings. In fact, I was about to say anything when Matthew cut me off. "Be cautious now, my dear. We don't want you to seem foolish once more." He talked in a light, even playful tone, but his eyes were wary. "At the Stevens party last month, do you remember attempting to tell that story about your client meeting?" "No, it wasn't." I tried again. "You understand what I mean?" Matthew interrupted, addressing our fellow travelers. "Sometimes she is so bewildered. I'm happy that I can correct her." While Brad and the others chuckled, I noticed Jennifer watching me suspiciously. The room was oppressive. My chest was pressed down by years of accumulated humiliation. The last blow was then delivered by Matthew. What's humorous, do you? Now he was on a roll and enjoying the attention. In fact, Tasha suggested that we begin attempting to conceive quickly. Is it feasible? She has trouble caring for herself. It was quiet in the room. Everyone was aware that we had been married for 5 years and had no kids. A few awkward looks passed back and forth. Matthew went on, unaware of the tension. I mean, let's be honest. Some people are just not cut out to be parents. Sure, honey, something cemented within of me in that moment. I had kept his secret all these years, out of love, due to loyalty, out of a misplaced sense of duty as a wife. I had endured the jokes, the mockery, and the constant erosion of my self-worth. While he was ripping me down to build himself up, I had grinned through the humiliation. But he uses our personal disputes to denigrate me while portraying himself as the superior husband. Not anymore. I laid my wine glass down carefully, my hand steady for the first time all evening. The entertainment for tonight was supposed to be the truth about our childless marriage. Matthew. My voice was fairly steady as I spoke. Perhaps you ought to discuss your visit with your doctor from the previous year. The smile vanished from his face. My dear, you're intoxicated. Perhaps you should have some water. No, I'm not drunk. Actually, I'm thinking clearly. For the first time in years. I turned to face our friends. For once, would you wish to hear an amusing story? Matthew got to his feet suddenly. Who needs a refill? Brad? Jennifer? There was a tinge of panic in his voice. Take a seat. Matthew. Silently, I said. Remember how much you enjoyed story time? It grew tense in the room. Our pals looked at each other. Matthew sensed the shift in dynamics, and his expression clouded as he realized his usual tactics were not working. Tasha has too much wine. He said he was trying to regain control. When she drinks, she becomes emotional. Remember when she attended the Christmas party? What time do I? When I noticed you lying to your friends about our sex life, I interrupted. Or when I heard you accuse me of being the reason we don't have kids. Jennifer put down her glass of wine. Matt, maybe you should let her speak. Oh, there's nothing to say. It sounded strained, but Matthew laughed. Tasha's acting too theatrical. Women are like that periodically. When you make fun of my cuisine, do I get dramatic? My appearance, my job, and my voice were all growing stronger. Or am I exaggerating the actual reason we are childless? The color went from Matthew's face. He approached me and took hold of my arm. Honey, let's talk about this privately. For a moment, I almost caved in to the old urge to protect him and hide his secret. His expression softened as if he could see my hesitation. He added softly, I apologize if my jokes were too offensive. You are aware of my affection for you. Let's just enjoy the rest of the evening. Brad gave an encouraging nod. Matt is only joking, so move quickly, Tasha. It has no meaning for him. I nearly thought it was true. I almost went back to my pattern of smiling and pretending. Matthew's hand was now on my shoulder, squeezing it slightly. A cautionary tale wrapped in love. Do you recall our conversation? Just loud enough for me to hear, he whispered. Certain things ought to remain confidential. That's when I saw it clearly. The fear was a cover for the dishonesty. The peril concealed in the warmth. For years, he had used my silence as a justification to degrade me. He had turned my discretion into a weapon. You're right, Matthew, I said, getting to my feet. Certain things ought to remain confidential, such as your jokes about our sexual life, particularly since. I came to a halt and met his eyes. How long has it been since we had one? He gave Tasha a hiss. Don't! What's wrong? I thought you liked a good joke. I glanced at our friends. Would you want to hear a funny story? My husband has gone for 2 years. Matthew rushed forward, tossing his wine glass over. This isn't funny anymore. No, I said, taking a step back. No, it wasn't, because we're all telling hilarious tales. Jennifer's voice trembled a little as she spoke. Maybe we should talk about what you told Brad last week, Matt. Matthew's head twitched towards her. What? What say you? Tasha is cold. How? You can't because of her. Jennifer spoke in a meaningful way, then stopped talking. The silence in the room grew uncanny. I glanced at Jennifer and then at Brad, who was now showing a keen interest in his shoes. You've been telling everyone that I'm to blame. I scarcely spoke above a whisper. My dear, they're misinterpreting. Matthew faltered. All I wanted to do was rant to Brad. You're familiar with male speak. Jennifer raised her voice. In front of everyone at the club, you have been accusing your wife of having flaws, something that she prevents you from doing. That she is. Quit chatting. When Matthew shouted, everyone jumped. You have no idea what you're discussing. But Jennifer wasn't finished. I also overheard you commenting at Susan's party that Tasha probably couldn't win over any males. She's really lucky to have you, since no one else would want one. That's enough. Matthew's face was red and he was angry. My hands trembled, but not because of terror. I had always been faithful and had kept his secret. He had been circulating untrue information about me and making fun of me, not only at home, but everywhere. Actually, I said, my voice releasing the strain, it is inadequate, not nearly enough. I turned to face our friends. Do you want to know why we don't have any children? Why? Matthew never talks about our sexual life, but he laughs at them. Why he's so anxious to make me appear inferior. Tasha, please. At last, Matthew's haughtiness gave way and he begged. Think about what you're doing. I've been thinking about it for the last 2 years, every time I've considered it. You ridiculed me in public. You always made me feel small. You always held me responsible for our problems. I considered it. I glanced around the room at these people who had spent years laughing at his jokes. The previous 2 years have seen my partner become impotent, erectile dysfunction in its entirety. We don't have children because of this. He makes up stories about my shortcomings because of this. So, in order to hide his own issues, he must publicly reject me. It was awfully quiet. Matthew's face was pale as he stood in awe. It was probably psychological, the doctor said. I continued to suggest therapy in a composed manner, but Matthew denied that he needed help. Instead, he decided to exploit me as a coping method by making fun of me. You promised, Matthew muttered, his voice breaking. You promised not to tell. You also promised to love and respect me, I replied. I guess we're both disappointed. Brad cleared his throat clumsily. Jennifer looked at Matthew with obvious disapproval. The others shifted around in their seats without looking at each other. That is something we have never done in our marriage. Matthew had neither a cruel joke nor a clever answer to distract. He just stood there, exposing me and degrading me in the same manner that he did for years. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted when his secret was made public. I was no longer under its weight. Now everyone would know the truth behind his sarcastic humor and the insecurity that drove him to mock me. You've wrecked everything. Matthew's voice was quiet. Dangerous. Is this funny to you? Do you think that mocking me would make you better? Matthew, I don't think humiliation is funny at all. That's how we differ from each other. Then he turned to our friends in a desperate effort to save his image. She is lying. She is trying to discredit me because she is envious of my success. You know, she understands. Give up. Brad's voice was forceful. Just quit. Matt, we've all witnessed your treatment of her. Oh, you're siding with her now. Matthew gave a sour laugh. After all I told you about her and all the times you laughed at my jokes. That's exactly why Jennifer intervened. The things you spoke about Tasha. They were vicious. We ought to have spoken up sooner. Matthew's face contorted with anger. Do you want to be cruel? Okay. He turned to face me, his disguise gone. Tell them how proud you are of your promotion. Tell them how you really do it. My heart stopped beating. This was the only line he had ever used in his jokes. My occupation. Discuss your boss's late nights with them. His voice brimmed with venom as he went on. Explain to them why you were chosen above other eligible candidates. It was quiet in the room. This was serious now. This was actually character assassination. From the doorway came something new. They can learn about the promotion from me. Alex, my employer, was standing there as they all turned. She was dropping off some contracts later, but I was unaware of it. I've been standing here for a while, Alex said, having been in the room long enough to hear you try to destroy your wife's reputation to protect your own. Matthew's face became drained. This is a private matter. Nothing is private with you, Matthew. I take it that's your thing? Making everything public? Alex surveyed the space. Tasha was elevated since she was the one who got the Peterson account. She worked on the pitch late into the night. Yes, with our entire team. I was there every night, so I know. Alex, you don't have to, I began. Yes, I do. She cut me off. I've watched you decline over the years because of him, not anymore. She looked across at Matthew. Your wife is really good at what she does. She earned all she owns. In this marriage, you are the only one who is taking advantage of other people. Matthew looked around the room and saw that none of his friends were still there. His face turned horrible. That's why you think of yourself as powerful? When he spat at me, my friends turned against me, exposing private health issues. You are pitiful. I stood up and took up my purse. No, Matthew. It is pathetic to elevate oneself at the expense of others. It's pathetic to blame your wife for your own failures. The idea that you gain authority by being cruel is pathetic. I glance at our guests. Thank you for attending. The festivities have most likely come to an end. Individuals began to seize their possessions. Matthew made one last attempt. There's no use in coming back if you leave now. I stopped at the staircase. That night was the first time you said anything funny. Because I won't, Matthew. Believe me. Word quickly spread throughout our social circle. Within a week, everyone was aware of Matthew's actions. He had been mistreating me for years, and he had health issues. His carefully crafted persona as the charming jester crumbled as people began to relate their own stories of his bullying at the country club, where he had delighted in entertaining with his sense of humor. People began to stay away from his table. He tried to make fun of other individuals, but his jokes didn't work, and instead elicited awkward quiet instead of laughter. After Jennifer exposed more of his horrible lies, even his closest friends shunned him. The last blow was dealt at the annual banquet of his employer. Matthew tried to tell one of his funny stories about me, forgetting that I was no longer his punching bag. A voice could be heard among the crowd. Will the rest of your stories be as accurate as this one? Matt? The gathering erupted in laughter, not at his joke, but at him. Embarrassed, he hurried away. He was complaining about how I had ruined his life and betrayed his confidence after getting inebriated at a pub, I found out later. But this is the problem with confidence. True confidence does not come from tearing someone down. To find my marriage, I had to lose mine first. But after moving into my new flat and packing my things, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The last time I saw Matthew, he tried to make a joke about my moving boxes. Nobody laughed. It turns out that cruelty isn't all that funny when everyone realizes what it is. I was barely able to recognize my life after 6 months. My rise at work gave me even more opportunities, and I was at last at ease taking them on without Matthew constantly undermining me. Rather of mocking my achievements, Alex became more than just my boss. He became a personal friend. I stayed in touch with Jennifer as well. She filed for divorce from Brad a month after our dinner party, saying that my position had given her the courage to face her own troubled marriage. These days, we often meet for coffee and talk about very funny things. The divorce procedure was surprisingly simple. Since Matthew was afraid of more humiliation, he accepted my demands without hesitation. It was his final attempt at a joke. At least now everyone knows why we didn't have children. When my lawyer just looked him down, I fell flat. Last week, I met him in a restaurant. He was eating alone and trying to make his usual jokes with the waiter. She didn't laugh. As I passed his table, he yelled out, "You still can't take a joke, Tasha." I stopped and turned around. "I can take a joke, Matthew. I didn't realize you were one until lately." As I was leaving, I heard something I had never heard in our marriage. Matthew said nothing. No mocking laughter, no rebuttal, only silently accepting his new circumstances. When I look in the mirror these days, I see someone who has had enough of being the object of offensive jokes from other people. I see someone whose voice, her smile, and her strength have returned. It turns out that there are other forms of revenge besides exposing a bully. It is reclaiming your joy story 3. Hi, my love. Today, I caught 3 fish. The alone is really helping me to cleanse my head. I stared at Nathan's text message, then at the photo of him lounging at a seaside bar in Punta Cana. He placed his arm around his secretary. The timestamp indicates that it was 2 minutes ago. That's wonderful, honey. Despite the wrath that was swelling inside of me, I responded back, my fingers steady. I'm so delighted you're finding tranquility in nature. My name is Liana Thompson, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought my marriage was solid. But then Rachel, a co-worker from my Denver legal firm, stormed into my office, her cheeks flushed with nervousness. She went on to access Brianna Moore's Facebook profile, saying, "You must see this." According to reports, my spouse of 8 years was on a wilderness retreat to decompress from the stress of his profession. He's living it up at a fancy resort with his 20-something secretary. I continued looking at the pictures. Strolls on the beach at sunset, candlelit dinners, kisses stolen beside the pool, timestamps and horrific notes like, "Finally with my true love and no more hiding," are attached to each one. I nearly smiled at the silliness of their neglect. "Oh my God, Liana, I'm so heartbroken." Rachel reached for my hand and murmured, "How are you going to react?" I turned off my laptop slowly. I keep a neutral appearance since I worked in the courts for years. Because his mistress couldn't help but broadcast their love getaway on social media, Nathan was oblivious that his well-planned camping trip was going to come apart. He drank cocktails and ruined our marriage without realizing that he had given me everything I needed to damage him. I said first and took out a legal document. To find out whether my lovely hubby is interested, I'm going to text him. I sent you another message. I miss you terribly. I look forward to hearing about all of your outdoor adventures. Rachel glanced at me with apparent astonishment. Do you not want to confront him? I smiled as I recalled all the cases I had won by giving my opponents the impression that they were in a stronger position. In my experience as a business lawyer, I had found that the element of surprise was often my most powerful weapon. Nathan thought his camping story was brilliant, and he never imagined that his mistress's addiction to social media would be his undoing. What's better than revealing his deceit, do you know? Rachel was already taking notes on my legal pad when I asked, so he could keep lying as I ruined his entire life. At Stanford Law School, I got to know Nathan. He was friendly and driven, and he seemed to share my values of tenacity and diligence. While some couples in our class drifted away due to the pressure of rigorous study schedules and competitive internships, we grew closer. Anyway, it was my original thought. After I graduated, I turned down a job offer from a well-known company in New York to stay in Denver with Nathan. One of the top investing firms in the city, Morrison & Webster, had recruited him. Additionally, I didn't want us to date remotely before to being married. "You're making the right decision," he had said. "We are a team." After quickly rising through the ranks and achieving my own success, I was promoted to Lambert and Cole's youngest corporate attorney position. Nathan appears to be happy with my achievements, but in retrospect, I could see how his smile would tighten whenever a client specifically requested that I take care of their case. Who can claim that our marriage was flawless? We settled disputes by coming to an agreement, identifying a middle ground, and bargaining like attorneys. Then Brianna started working at his firm 6 months ago. She appears to be quite talented at her job and is youthful and attractive. Nathan would remark that she's very efficient and that this is the first time he's had a secretary who can keep up with my schedule. I chose to dismiss the warning flags. I trusted my spouse after all. Rachel's voice jolted me out of my daydream. Remember when he failed to attend your anniversary dinner last month, stated that he worked a late shift? I visited Brianna's Facebook profile once more and went back over her history. There was a check-in at Barolo Grill that same evening. The caption stated, "Working late at night has never felt better." Rachel shook her head when I muttered, "I can't believe I was so blind." You weren't blind, Liana. You believed. There is a difference. I considered every other signal. I tossed away the new gym membership because he never used it. The unforeseen interest in out-of-state conferences and jobs. The passwords on his phone and laptop had changed. I had handled innumerable divorce cases and had seen the classic indications. But I had convinced myself that our marriage was special. What's the worst thing, you know? I mentioned our shared account records. He's using our money to finance their little romance. When I showed Rachel the most recent transactions, her eyes sprang wide. First-class tickets to Punta Cana, a 5-star resort. Yes, I said, getting ready to send my bank an email, but it wouldn't be long. For the following hour, I meticulously recorded each questionable transaction from our shared accounts. Dinner is forgotten in the living room, becoming chilly. It didn't matter, as I was constructing my argument. The evidence was damning. Meals at places I'd never been, costs for jewels I'd never received, the cost of hotels in the cities where Nathan claimed to be seeing customers. Look at this, please. I pointed at my screen and said it to Rachel. 3 months ago, he planned their trip to Punta Cana. This was no spontaneous moment. He has been prepared for it. But what made him tell you that he was going camping? Why not just claim it was another work trip? I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with another text from Nathan. This time, he offered a photo of a tent set up by a lake, a classic camping image that was plainly grabbed off the internet. "Home sweet home," his message read. "The stars are amazing out here." My hand trembled, not with grief, but with cold rage. He couldn't even find a trustworthy photo to back up his untruth after 8 years of marriage. I discovered what I was searching for when I opened my inbox. I had helped examine several contracts for Nathan's business months prior, and I was given the employee handbook in bold. Relationships between direct subordinates and supervisors are entirely illegal and will be dismissed straight away. "Rachel," I murmured hesitantly, "did you know that Brianna has been using Instagram to chronicle their whole relationship? We obtained her profile. It was a treasure trove. Months of subtle photos that were all somehow incriminating, coffee cups with Nathan's name visible, his watch in the corner of dinner shots, even a picture in his office after hours. Her sat on his desk as he beamed up at her." Rachel, who had been examining the financial paperwork I had collected more carefully, responded in a strained voice, "It gets worse. Take a look at these transfers." My stomach sank when I saw what she had found. There had been more to Nathan's romance than spending our joint money. For months, he had been depositing large sums of money into a covert account. I had no knowledge of this account. $90,000. As I stared at the total, I muttered, "He has been concealing his wealth." Rachel cautiously stated, "That's more than just affair money." "It looks like money from an exit plan," I finished. "He has been getting ready to end our relationship." The realization hit me like a kick to the gut. This was more than just an affair. It was a calculated plan. While I'd been establishing our life together, he'd been preparing his departure with a younger girl, meticulously hiding assets, and prepared to blindside me. I decided and went to my feet. "Rachel, I need a favor. Would you be able to cover the rest of the meetings for me this week?" "Of course," she said. "How are you going to react?" I grabbed my phone and typed my spouse another passionate text to let him know how much I missed him. He would wish he had never learned to lie because of me. The next morning, I went into Harriman Credit Union. As soon as they opened, the manager knew me from the corporate accounts I oversaw, brought me into his office immediately away. "Mrs. Thompson, what's bringing you in so early? I need to discuss some odd behavior I've noticed on my joint accounts," I stated as I flipped through copies of Nathan's transfers. "I think my spouse has been transferring funds without my permission or knowledge. I moved my personal money to a separate, safe account and frozen our joint accounts in less than an hour. Nathan wouldn't realize this until he tried to access the money. Maybe when he had to pay for his romantic hideaway. I returned to my office and began the second part. I called Nathan's company's HR director, Susan Mills, who has been a longtime client of mine. I began by saying, "Susan, I have a delicate topic to discuss." The subject matter was Nathan and Brianna, his secretary. "More." Susan's voice grew sharp. "What about them?" I forwarded to her a carefully curated selection of Brianna's social media posts. "I believe that this violates the policies of your organization about the interaction between supervisors and subordinates." The silence on the other end made it clear. "This has to be escalated immediately." Susan finally said something. "This is really concerning. I understand." I responded in a professional manner. "I just felt you needed to know." Then I called our locksmith. Being in charge of all home maintenance had advantages. Nathan had never been interested in any of these things. Yes, if at all possible, I must get all of the locks changed today while awaiting the locksmith. I began packing Nathan's belongings. Each monogrammed shirt, expensive tie, and elegant suit was stuffed into a sturdy garbage bag. 8 years of marriage had been reduced to black trash bags on our spotless driveway. My phone was buzzing. Nathan hasn't texted anyone else. "I'm eager to tell you about all of my travels." I smiled as I typed back. "You two will be missed. Hi, quick question. Did you remember to pay the credit card bill before you left?" He responded quickly. "Of course, don't worry about anything, honey. One more falsehood." I was now gazing at the past due notice, so I knew he hadn't paid it. He had neglected his daily responsibilities since he was too busy planning his trip. Rachel called at about noon. "Leanna, you have to see this. Brianna just made another post." I went to Facebook. My spouse was spotted raising a glass of champagne while on a sunset cruise. The caption stated, "Living my best life with my sweetheart. No longer hiding, no longer hiding. Indeed," I muttered, transferring the photo to Susan at HR. The locksmith arrived immediately after my divorce attorney emailed to confirm that she had sent in the required paperwork. It was all coming together. My phone then rang. James Morrison himself, Nathan's supervisor, Liana. He spoke in a serious tone. "I'm calling for a purpose you must know. I can make a guess." We were unaware that he had been using client funds to finance this romance. The images sparked an internal audit. It's not good. I closed my eyes and thought about this new information. How terrible, a criminal charge is terrible. We'll let the cops know about it. I hung up, feeling a bizarre combination of sickness and vindication. Although this level of betrayal was surprising, it simply confirmed that I was acting honorably. I taped a note on the top of the trash bags on the driveway as a last touch. I hope going camping was worthwhile. Remember to upload images. My phone rang from an unknown number while I was looking over the last draft of my divorce documents. I had to answer for some reason. "Is Leanna Thompson here?" The voice of a lady, strange and uneasy. Yes. Who is this? My name is Sarah. I am. Up until last month, Brianna and I shared a room. Something is important for you to know. My heart started pounding. I'm paying attention. They have acted in this manner before. Brianna, Sarah said, Nathan and her. At his previous company, they had already performed the fraud. I sank into my office chair. Which plan? Targeting high-ranking executives, they gather compromising photographs before threatening to publish everything unless they are bought off. However, things were different this time. In reality, Brianna fell in love with Nathan. Their routine was disrupted when she began posting everything online. He is furious. The room seemed to be spinning. I thought about the money. Nathan had been relocating, the client monies he'd been embezzling. This was more than a simple affair. It was a sophisticated fraud that had gotten out of hand. You're telling me this, but why? Brianna phoned me weeping last night, so I asked. Nathan is making threats to hold her accountable for everything. She's terrified. I hung up and hurriedly called James Morrison back. James, we need to discuss. You might be surprised to learn how complicated this is. Within an hour, I was sitting in his office, summarizing everything Sarah had told me. James appeared to be physically ill. 3 other businesses, he responded, looking over the documentation I'd prepared. 3 other executives were blackmailed. How could we have overlooked this? Because they were cautious. I responded, till Brianna went off script. My phone was buzzing. Again, dinner by the campfire with Nathan. I wish you were here. I stared at his message, identifying it as what it was, not merely a deceit, but a purposeful plot point. All those business trips and those late nights at work. How many more con artists did he run that I didn't know about? James leaned forward. Leona, we need to use caution. This is now a federal lawsuit, assuming your statements are correct. Why? For dishonesty, blackmail, embezzlement. I know exactly how we ought to handle it, I said, pulling out my phone. I typed a message to Nathan. Darling, there has been a problem with one of our accounts. Is it possible for you to check your email? I then sent him a well-written email with copies of his previous frauds, Brianna's social media posts, and Sarah's statement. I added one line. It must have interrupted your camping trip. My phone was inundated with warnings in a matter of minutes. Nathan finally gave up his camping act after 6 calls. Before deleting her whole Facebook account, Brianna posted a lengthy, depressing video confession. It was the house of cards collapsing. James had already contacted the FBI. They would like to meet tomorrow morning, he said. This might be really important. I nodded, strangely relaxed. I'll be there. That evening, when I was sitting in my newly secured home, Nathan sent me one more SMS. What you have done is unknown to you. I can explain anything. I smiled as I thought about all the evidence that had been safely captured and forwarded to many agencies. I did type back, yes, I understand it perfectly. In contrast to your photos of your camping excursion, I also have real receipts. I then banned his phone and got myself a glass of wine. Tonight, I may take pleasure in the knowledge that Nathan's immaculately constructed house of lies was on fire, but tomorrow would be a very trying day. At 9 in the morning, the FBI meeting was scheduled to start. By 8:30, the lobby at Morrison and Webster was a mess. Dominican police reportedly detained Nathan and Brianna at the airport as they tried to depart Punta Cana separately. They extorted 6 of our most valued clients, and he muttered, rubbing his temples. James Morrison looked like he hadn't slept 6 clients. The amount is moreover $2 million. The forensic accountants I finished working through the night said, that's all we've found thus far. A shrewd woman in her 40s named Agent Phillips laid out photographs on the conference table. Nathan and Brianna all behave in the same way, even though they have different bosses. The evidence was overwhelming, Mrs. Thompson. Your spouse and Miss Moore will be extradited within 48 hours, she said. But for us, the money trail is more important. Those offshore accounts were found by you. My phone was buzzing. It was a message from an unknown number. Nathan is using a hotel telephone. Baby, please. You're destroying everything. We can fix this. Agent Phillips nodded when I gave the message to him. Don't interrupt his conversation. Work. What's missing? I answered the text message. The affair or the crimes? You're not getting it. He responded immediately. I handled this for us. The money was meant for our future. Our prospects? I almost laughed out loud. When you were about to leave me. Who mentioned that to you? Brianna. She is lying. She is not important. Agent Phillips was recording every message. She noticed him scrambling. Put up more effort. Really? I composed. So you didn't help her set up the Cayman's account? The one that you have been using to transfer money from customers? Several times the typing bubbles appeared and vanished. Finally. How were you made aware of it? I put an end to his thought process. I'm a business lawyer, Nathan. I make a living by literally following money trails. By the way, greetings from the FBI. His response was hasty and desperate. I'll tell you where all the money is. Please don't let them arrest me. The agent, Phillips, smiled. I got him. Within a few hours, Nathan and Brianna were arrested. Nobody had foreseen the extent of their scheme. The FBI found accounts across multiple states, companies, and victims in 3 different countries. In order to discuss the company's situation, James Morrison called an urgent board meeting. He began. I responded, We'll make it, because you were able to capture it. All victims are being made whole after it was reported. That's the story we're telling. He looked at me appreciatively. If you want to be our general counsel, Liana, let me think about it. Despite knowing the answer, I said, I had higher goals in mind. Rachel brought over wine and food later that night while I sat in my home office. So she added, I heard Nathan seeking to plea bargain. I offered a nod, willing to provide testimony against all individuals who were involved in their past acts. It seems that even I did not discover all the victims. How are you doing? I glanced at the degrees hanging on the wall of my office. The case files were mine, the life I had made. What do you find funny? He always considered my job to be a hobby. I did this to pass the time till we had kids. He was unaware of that, all those skills, all that knowledge. It was precisely what I needed to overcome him. So Rachel raised her glass to karma. No. Thinking of all the evidence I had systematically acquired, all the legal threads I had pulled, and all the dominoes I had meticulously lined up before bringing them to justice, I corrected her, the kind you make up for yourself. Fortunately, the trial was brief. Nathan and Brianna both agreed to plea deals. He received an 8-year sentence. She earned a 5. Given the volume of evidence I had gathered, their counsel advised against challenging the charges. In the end, the man who had dominated others for years couldn't win this one with words alone. I sat in the courtroom for punishment wearing the same deep blue suit I wore during our first law school mock trial. Nathan couldn't quit gazing at me. He had a desperate, disbelieving look on his face. It had now dawned on him that I had been playing chess while he was playing checkers. Your Honor, he made one last attempt. I could address this in private with my wife. He was interrupted by Judge Matthews. Your wife isn't pursuing charges, Mr. Thompson. The federal government is in charge. We also have evidence of many cases of wire fraud, extortion, and embezzlement. I didn't stay to watch him being executed. Instead, when I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Denver morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. I already had my own staff, a corner office, and a promotion from Morrison and Webster to general counsel. But more importantly, I had started a side business that helped companies identify and steer clear of internal fraud. There was a huge demand for someone who had uncovered one of the biggest corporate blackmail schemes in Colorado history. Nathan got his last letter a week later. I put it in the shredder without opening it. A concluding page is not essential for all chapters. They just have to quit. The media focus eventually faded, and I was able to find a new rhythm in my life. Clients from 3 states sought my services, and my fraud consultancy firm expanded faster than I had expected. Sometimes I worried if Nathan saw the articles about my achievement from his jail cell. Sarah, Brianna's former flatmate, stopped by my office one morning 6 months after the sentencing. With trepidation, she said, "I heard you help companies protect themselves against fraud now. I'm starting a small business." I took a moment to look at her after all that had happened, remembering how her phone call had been essential to revealing Nathan's entire scheme. Later that evening, as I was working late in my corner office at Morrison in Webster, I said to James Morrison, "The first consultation is free." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He said, "Just signed another client. They specifically asked you to handle their case, said that they heard how you handled the Thompson scandal." I smiled at the irony. Rather, Nathan's ambition to destroy me was my strongest selling point. James went on to explain that when he was in prison, he tried to write to me and urged me to have you reply to his letters. I kept typing without looking up. I also told him that you were too busy running 2 successful businesses to read jail letters. I finally looked up and noticed my picture in the office window. The woman gazing back was neither a victim nor a betrayed wife. She was a survivor who overcame betrayal. "Perfect answer," I said, and went back to work.